Welcome to Prepared for Parenthood, the podcast for hopeful, expectant, and new parents with little ones up to age 5. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Duger, a psychotherapist, author, educator, parent coach, and married mother of 2. On this show, we'll discuss everything from the most up-to-date practicals of best supporting your young children, to thriving in relationship as a family, to more surprising topics around the psychology and development of babies from conception through age 5. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm thrilled to have you here today. Welcome back to Prepared for Parenthood. I'm really excited today. We'll be speaking with Teresa Robertson. She's a certified nurse midwife and a birth intuitive. Teresa's involvement in birth and childbearing over the past 43 years has enabled her to serve as a translator between the worlds of intuition and Western allopathic medical approaches. She provides empowering information, support, and tools to assist her clients in connecting with their unborn and newborn children. Teresa also works with non-childbearing clients through transitions, including career, relationship, exploring life purpose, and resolving loss and grief. Her gift of getting to the heart of the matter and communicating what she perceives with clarity and compassion aids her clients to efficiently stop striving patterns and begin to thrive. Teresa believes that intuition skills will be the operational language for thriving in the 21st century. So welcome, Teresa. I'm really pleased you could join us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
You bet. So before we jump in, I just wanted to share a little bit about how I know Teresa. I sought out support carrying my first child when I was about 7 months pregnant. It was the first time I'd had carried a child for as long as 7 months. And I noticed that this baby was really kind of sitting on one side of my body and putting a lot of pressure on my hip and my sciatic nerve. And I was getting a lot of pain. I went to all kinds of specialists. I went to a non-force chiropractor, a massage therapist, all these different people trying to get this pain worked out for myself. And nothing was helping. And so I found Teresa's name and I thought, well, I'm just going to give it a try and see what could happen speaking to a birth intuitive. And I had this amazing session with Teresa where she asked if I had had any prior pregnancies. And just before we had gotten pregnant with the child who is now our first daughter, I had miscarried a baby very early on, probably 6 or 8 weeks into the pregnancy. So that was my first pregnancy. And this was just a couple of months before we got pregnant with our second pregnancy. And I had been very sad about losing that pregnancy, but I thought that I had worked through it. And I said, yes, there was a pregnancy just before this. And she said something to the effect of, well, did you really let this baby go? Meaning, energetically, right? Obviously, the baby was no longer inside of me. And I thought, well, yeah, I think so. But I still had some sadness and probably some grief to work through around that. And we did this beautiful session together where Teresa helped me kind of visualize, really inviting this baby energetically to leave in order to make space for the baby that I was carrying currently at that time. And what happened immediately after that visualization was really profound. So what happened was our oldest daughter moved over from sitting essentially fully on my right side of my body, on my hip, like spread out and took up the entire space of my womb and completely relieved all the pain that I had been feeling for at least a month. And the pain never came back. And it was really just very moving and very powerful for me. And so I share that because it had such an amazing impact on me. And I so appreciated not being in pain for the last 2 months of my pregnancy, Teresa, and had no idea that this was something that I was still kind of carrying around energetically within me. And so just thanks to you for that. And am wondering, how often do you hear stories like that or experience stories like that, work with people where things dramatically shift in those ways when they are pregnant or, postpartum?
Sometimes I don't hear for years because sometimes I'll work with somebody just one time and I may or may not have follow up with them, but then maybe they'll come back when they're pregnant again or they'll send a friend. I just had an experience with this is from way back. It was actually one of my midwifery clients from 30 years ago. Sent somebody in her community who was pregnant and who was struggling. It was a second pregnancy close to a first baby. And, I hear you said da 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 it happened. And so that was this new client's introduction to me. And it was really wonderful to work with supporting this pregnant mama. There was a time when she was separated from her husband for work reasons. He needed to travel for work while she was pregnant. Just yesterday, she actually sent me a text with a picture of her two babies. You said something like, they're going to be really close. And they're like in a head meld together, snuggling up. So sometimes it's immediate, like in your experience, the baby really shifted. And also what a gift for your daughter too, to then be able to feel safe enough to take up all that space. So sometimes I hear about it soon, and sometimes it is delayed when I meet them again, especially around the fertility clients I work with. Sometimes it's pretty dramatic where they're holding a trauma such as a sexual trauma or previous loss. And in our culture with loss and grief, we're expected to move on really quickly. I do ask questions from what I've learned about working with perinatal psychology in all my intakes, no matter who I work with, whether they're childbearing or not, to understand about those imprints and how they may be affecting what somebody wants to accomplish during the session.
For listeners who may not really understand intuition, or perhaps maybe don't really believe in intuition as a kind of scientific practice, would you be willing to explain what you know about intuition, what it is, how it happens, what we know about it at this point in our lives?
Yeah. I think for a lot of us, intuition is sort of the secret. That person has the gift. We hear a lot about the gift that's passed down intergenerationally. I never knew that I was really intuitive. I thought that was just always part of the landscape of everything I was perceiving, right? So we all have a pineal gland. That's the gland of perception for intuition. It's nothing woo-woo. The pineal gland just happens to be behind our third eye. I think some individuals have the experience of that being shut down more than others. So some people have more of an ability because they weren't shamed or it wasn't shut down earlier, or it was something that was accepted in the culture of their family. So we're all born with this, and I think it's part of our survival equipment. I think we've all had the lived experience of walking into a place and it feeling really creepy and not safe. That's our intuition. I think most people have had the experience of thinking about somebody and someone will text you or call you. You'll run into them. That's also part of our intuition. I live in a mountain community and I have to travel a canyon that can be pretty dangerous. And I've had the experience a lot there of when it doesn't feel right to go down, I'll have a feeling and then my body will start talking. So I think there's different levels that people's intuition affects them. It doesn't have to be a vision. Some people aren't visual. Many people are more kinesthetic, which means they feel it in their body. Some people will hear, some people will smell. Just normalizing it is something that's built in as part, I think, of our survival mechanism. With childbearing individuals, it's really common, but there's not a lot of talk about it. So someone goes, oh, I thought or felt this, but I don't know if it's true. And there isn't a lot of space in our culture for both parents to acknowledge that their feelings or their connection to what's going on with this family expanding, with this child coming in, even if they're not the one gestating that pregnancy, is real, right? So that's what I like to share with individuals to understand how to do that, how that happens, how to trust it, and how to understand what their language of that is. Because for everybody, it's a little different.
I love the idea that it developed out of a survival need. For most of us, like you said, we've had that experience of walking into a place that feels creepy or unsafe, or some people get gut feelings, other people have hair stand up on the back of their neck,
Mhm.
or they know somebody's standing behind them. So I think there is this idea that it's kind of woo woo, like, well, you can't prove it, but you can feel it. And most people feel it on some level. And it's probably something that's happening before it reaches our more conscious mind, right? So it's really down deep in those recesses of the survival piece. And then we're picking up something like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm noticing this, or I'm feeling this, or I'm sensing something. And it feels a little strange. And I've noticed too that young children in
Mhm.
general seem to be much more tuned in on that level. So, for example, when we had our second child, our first child was letting us know exactly what her name was going to be. She was clearly
Mhm.
having some kind of connection with this baby that was certainly below my consciousness. And she was very clear about what this baby's name was going to
Mhm.
be and very insistent. And she would say things, Mom, the baby wants this, or the baby's going to need to be in this kind of space, or things like that. That I was like, how do you know that? And she's like, I just know. And I've heard this from dozens and dozens of mostly moms who've had that kind of experience with an older child. So I think it's fascinating. And I think maybe as we get older, either we choose to follow it and invite it to develop more, or it probably just gets shut down a lot in this particular culture, at least.
It made me think of a couple things. We're getting intuition information coming more to the right side of our brain. For us to translate it, it has to go through the pons in the brain to the left side of the brain. Depending on how much practice you have with that connector may be stronger for some people than others. That's the challenge sometimes when I work with clients because I guide someone through a process so they understand how to use their intuition. And then I ask them to explain to me what they're experiencing. And that's the hard part because then the explanation goes to the left side of the brain. Sometimes that translation doesn't happen. Using other nonverbal forms can be helpful, like music or movement or drawing. When I was a kid, I was told a lot that I was imagining things. And well, don't think I was imagining things. I think I was verbalizing things that people didn't want to be said out loud. So instead of an adult saying, hey, you're perceiving this, but this is a better way of expressing it, or sometimes some of these things are more private, there weren't any guardrails. It was just told that it was wrong and that I was imagining it. So for me to understand what was mine and not mine, that's also really helpful because sometimes it can get very overwhelming. And so when you're working with children, they might just be overwhelmed with a lot of information they're getting. And for them to understand, hey, this isn't your information. So let's give them a container over there. Work with children is really fun because they're really open up until the age of 4. Their brain waves are in a place where they are just much more open. That's why we hear about their imaginary friends. That's why I've had lots of parents tell me that their older child's talking about a girl or a boy. And where are they? When are you going to have them? That's really common.
Mhm. How does being a certified nurse midwife help you in terms of being a birth intuitive counselor?
So, what I love about my allopathic training as a nurse and then a nurse midwife, and what was fascinating to me is how often what I was learning about intuition matched physiology, matched the concrete pieces of how we know our bodies work, how we know our hormones work, how we know our systems work, right? The patterns aren't very different. What I think I've been able to offer clients that's been really valuable is I'm sort of a one-stop shop. One of the gifts of nursing is we're trained to do care plans. We're trained to assess a lot of different variables and help organize the information so we understand what goes first, what goes second in terms of importance. So as a nurse midwife, when I'm working with someone who is wanting to be pregnant and maybe experiencing some challenges, or is pregnant and then has some other health things going on, then I can look at their labs, understand what's going on with their body and address the physical. And then we talk about how the mind body can interface with, like with you, right? Because you did all that structural stuff. You did the logical pieces of how to get that baby to move, except no one thought to ask the baby to move also. But what's keeping the baby from moving? What's the obstacle there? And so I think it's really helpful to say, hey, there's this going on with your labs, or you might want to ask your provider about this. So it's just another way of allowing that integration with the mind, body, and spirit, right? A lot of times in our culture, we separate. And actually, we're a complete organism. What's happening with your physical body is going to affect your mind, body, your spirit. And I think also when we're talking about a baby spirit coming in, or an actual baby that's growing inside someone's body, they're an active passenger and you're actively parenting. The work I do is like cooperative parenting. You're parenting from the beginning. And so how do you work with this person who's in your body that you're sharing space with? How do you work with them? And a lot of times the tools help a lot during labor also, where the mama is connecting with the baby and can participate with the process of labor instead of it being a different kind of process, right? Understanding the baby's experiencing labor too, and that we're in this together. And how do we navigate whatever's happening during that experience together?
Do you have a story about an experience like that where a parent is giving birth and
hmm
they're maybe having a hard time wanting to connect with baby and make the transition into the outside world a little bit easier?
Two of them come to mind. One of them is my very dear nurse midwife friend, and I attended her home birth. Most of the births I attended were hospital based. Her daughter's 26 now. That birth was so powerful because my friend and her daughter were really connected in utero, and I was really connected with her too. So her daughter would pop into my head and say, okay, I want you to listen to my heartbeat now. So I'd go listen to her heartbeat. She had a very short pushing stage. And my friend was in this most unusual contortion. And she was so connected with her daughter, understanding if she raised her legs this much, then she could navigate that space. I learned a lot from that birth. And 8 years ago, I had another client where it wasn't her first birth, but I shared some of that with her. And it worked really, really powerfully because her babies tended to be posterior. We worked during her pregnancy to really start practicing that connection. So when it came to that time of transition and then pushing, she could consciously use those skills to create that space and to really understand what the baby needed. Another was a client in Arkansas, and she wanted a VBAC. It was her second child, and we connected sometime in her labor. I had to be the bad person that said, the baby wants you to go to the hospital now and have a C-section. And that's not what she was receiving, but it was what the baby wanted. And she did that. And then she went on to VBAC with her third. So it's really getting that place of understanding what the baby wants. And sometimes it's not congruent with what we might have written on paper. And that's parenting, right? It doesn't always go according to the script.
Along that same vein, sometimes, like you said, we have different wants and needs than the baby might have. And we're working in tandem with that baby and with our healthcare professionals to bring this baby safely into the world. Do you think someone's intuition ever goes wrong? Can we hold on so tightly to say, I really want to have the VBAC? If we're holding on so tightly, are we then blocking out the intuitive sense of, oh, maybe things aren't going as smoothly as we need them to here, and it's probably going to be a safer option for all of us to do something else? Is it possible that the intuition ever goes wrong or that we block it out?
I don't know enough to say if the intuition goes wrong. That's a really broad statement. Can our will interface? Yeah, and I think that's why it's really important. Like in that case, the husband, the father of the babies, was the one that said, hey, why don't we call Teresa? So in that case, it was her will wanting to have this different experience because the previous experience, it was pretty traumatic, right? I think the gift in that birth was I could talk with them, where the nurse midwife person came in and said, how can we make this so that it doesn't feel as intrusive and traumatic this time? I teach the pregnant families I'm working with, there's a regular signal for when the baby wants to get your attention to start connecting. And that can be a body signal. Your heart might get warm, or the baby might move a lot. Then I also teach something I call the 911 signal, and that one's a little harder. I developed that for clients who are having home births. I've had several use it, that they had a 911 signal, that they connected with their provider, and then they were able to get care in a preventative manner, that everything turned out safely. But the 911 signal can also be used later when the child is no longer in your body. So that one's sometimes a little more challenging. It's practicing.
And what kind of a 911 signal would a baby give who was in the process of being born?
I usually ask when we do this that it not be a body sensation, because when someone's giving birth, you have all kinds of sensations you might never, ever imagine would be possible. Sometimes people will see 911 flashing or flashing lights or hear a siren in their head. And the other part of that is the baby is not to elicit that signal unless there's something that's happening that needs support of a healthcare professional to do it in a time that there will be enough time to get help, not waiting at the last minute.
Right.
This is also really helpful as a provider. Right? Something may look like it's okay, but what are your intuitive signals? It would be ideal if both the parents and the providers had that language that they could share with each other.
We've been speaking with Teresa Robertson, a certified nurse midwife and birth intuitive counselor. Teresa, what would you like people to take away about their own intuition, and how can they get in touch with you if they are curious about this work and would like to work with you?
I think the first thing is don't be afraid, be curious, and don't try to control it. There are some really basic tools that anybody can learn where you can just start to connect with an unborn child. And I think it's just practice. And it's not about being right or being wrong. It's about being curious. And then when it does happen, notice how that feels. When something intuitive happens for me, it just feels like I'm in the flow, that I'm in alignment. So just notice how it feels for you. How you could get a hold of me, it's my website, www.livingintuitivecounseling.com. Birthintuitive.com would also get you to that same website.
Thank you so much for being here today, Teresa. Fascinating topic, and really appreciate you sharing your expertise in this.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It was a lot of fun talking with you.
Take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Prepared for Parenthood podcast today. I hope you found this episode educational, informational, and conversational, and that you'll join me again for another episode soon. If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast, I'd very much appreciate if you would rate, review, and subscribe. If you're interested in more information related to today's podcast, or are looking for parent coaching or courses, you can find my information in the show notes or online at preparedforparenthood.com.